The second one is establishing framework. So this is assuming that some of the things that were in that first one have already been done to some degree, and you're going to continue to add and build onto those things, but now you're going to purposefully give a greater framework. So I put encourage, and the first thing that I would recommend encouraging is your child's strengths. Before we started homeschooling, somebody that was a veteran homeschooler whose children were grown said, hey, can I give you some advice about that? And I'm like, absolutely. And he said, you know, when we homeschooled our kids, we were so focused on trying to build up their deficits. In retrospect, I looked back and I realized that if I'd put more energy in building up their strengths, it would have been better for them. And I just took that, stuck it right in my head, and I ran with it. So with child's strengths, it's really just getting to know your child, and it's usually their strengths, their interests, it's usually the thing that bugs you the most. Because that's the thing that that child wants to do all the time, right? It's the thing that they're talking about, the thing that they're showing you, and hey, look at this, look at this, look at this, and I want to do that, and it's whatever. And with my oldest daughter, she was always really into like stories and reading, and she just wanted to read, and we loved movies as a family. And then I introduced her to the wonderful world of bonus features, and she got really into bonus features, and that was her thing. But we had the freedom and the luxury to encourage that strength, so I kind of challenged her on something, and she ended up writing her first screenplay and making her first film when she was 12. Well, because we could, and I saw that it was a strength and that she had some natural ability, and she saw me working on something on Photoshop, and she's just like, I want to do that, and I'm just like, and it was just like, okay, she has an interest, stop rolling your eyes. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to use a couple of things, see what you can make, I'll be back. And she blew me away. She was able to pick it up, she bloop, 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 she made bookmarks for Christmas, and we laminated. I'm like, well, you got some skills, child. And so the first time I gave her some raw footage, and I'm like, hey, this is how you use this editing. Make me a 30-second montage. Let's see what you can do. And I came back, and this was a beautiful montage with sound and things and transitions. And I was like, well, you got some filmmaker in you. Okay, so where can we take this? And so it's going to the library and getting dummy books and filmmaking for dummies. And here, and I just chucked a bunch of books at her. I'm like, here, read this, and then let's talk. And so from that, she was able to develop a love of screenwriting, which eventually she was able to enter some film festivals and win and have that as another life experience. And so her strengths actually, you know, she was going to be a filmmaker forever, but then the music thing came into play a little bit stronger. But it's a skill that she now has. I mean, she could totally get a job editing. She's done video projects for other people as side jobs. And so it was, I saw this kind of drive in her. And so that's the direction that we took her in, because it was a strength, and we were able to monopolize on it. Communication, encourage communication. There comes a point where they aren't real thrilled to talk to you, at least all the time, and their world gets bigger, and they have friends, and they have other adults that are pouring into them that they want to communicate with. And they need someone to say all the same things that you've been saying, but they need another adult to say it at some point, usually in that late elementary school, early junior high. It's like, I've been telling you the same thing for 10 years, and then someone else will say it, and they're like, wow, that is brilliant. Do you know what so-and-so's mom just told me? I'm like, seriously, for real? But at least they got it. That's the point. The point is that they get the information. So encourage them to communicate, not just with you, but it's like if they're not getting it, encourage them to talk to somebody that you trust, that is on the same page as you, because somebody else can say the same exact thing, but the way that they do it, they might have a different example, or just the timing's right, and they'll get some concept that you've been trying to drill into their head for a decade, right? Trust. This was a big thing with, especially with the development of social media. Talking to my older teen children, since I now have 3 teen children, their trust is really important, and if you want them to be able to communicate, especially things that they're really struggling with later, teach them very early that you can keep their confidence and that you respect their choice. If you say, you know, do you mind if I post this on? And if they say no, to let that be okay. Because it is part of their digital history that you're creating every time you post about them, and or if it's just talking on the phone to a friend and they hear you talking about them, especially in a way that's not edifying if it's a complaint. Obviously, if you're having a hard day and they're having a hard time and you're going to somebody for counsel or for prayer, it's completely different. But when they hear you griping about them to somebody else, it makes them shut down and not want to trust you with their heart. And so just be careful, because later on there's so much going on with pressure and outside influences that you're going to really need to have their trust so that they can open up to you, so that you can help them navigate through the very difficult teen years. The teen years don't have to be scary, but they aren't without challenges. I think our teen years were relatively easy, but that doesn't mean that it was drama-free. There were still challenges that we had to overcome and are still continuing to overcome. You want to encourage them to have a love of learning. Learning should be cool. Learning should be exciting. Learning shouldn't just be memorize a bunch of information and engage it on a test. That's kind of why most of us homeschool, right? We want it to be like fun and engaging. And if they get excited about something that's not, and I know if there's a lot of type A moms in here like myself, if it's not on your checkoff list, I know you really want to check those boxes that day, but if you're reading some story and they go, oh, I wonder why that blah, 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 and you just go, oh, you should go find out about that, and they want to sit there and research it and get some books and dig around and find out about it, that's learning, and that's good even if it's taken you away from checking that box in full that day. Just put a little add-on that was like a little side elective, and you can just give yourself bonus points. But just know that if they get into the habit of getting curious about the world or about a person or about something, and they want to find it out for themselves, as much as you can. I mean, obviously there comes a point where they do need to sit down and do the things that you're asking them to do, but if you give them enough freedom and just say, hey, after we finish this math test or after we finish this thing, you can have this much time to go and dig around and find out that, and I would love to hear what you find out. If you give them opportunity to do that, they'll continue to love to learn, and they'll learn more than you can imagine, because my kids all know more than me, and I don't even know how that happened. It's pretty crazy. But to recognize that they have to have that need met to go and dig it out for themselves, or else it'll just be this process of, Mom's giving me information, I have to write this information, and she wants me to tell her this information, and when can I do what I want to do? You want them to get excited, because that's going to give you clues for later, for what are they interested in? What do they want to pursue? I mean, I know more than one kid that got excited about something, did some research, totally changed the trajectory of their life, and it ended up being the career that they pursued. I know story after story after story. It was they just got curious about something, started digging it around. Next thing you know, their whole life is just, and that person inspired them, or that activity inspired them to continually just go in another direction, and it was life-changing. I encourage them to keep promises. So that's a habit. So when you're, for the first time, handing over those car keys to your child that's going to drive the 1,000-pound death machine down the road, and you say, please text me when you get there so I know you're alive and I can take my first breath, that they'll do it, that they'll promise. And that when they say they're not going to have friends in the car, you know that they're going to keep their word. That when they say if they get into trouble and make a bad choice, that they'll call you instead of getting into a car having consumed alcohol and or drugs. You want them to have a backbone of character, that they care enough about their own word and their reputation and what it means to them, that they'll keep their promises no matter how big or small. Obviously, things happen, and you want them to come to you if they can't fulfill a promise, to figure out how can I make it better for someone, especially if they're keeping to a promise of somebody outside the house. But you want them to cultivate that, because it's super important later. And I think I got another thing. Oh, so I encourage them to have a habit of building others up. We have a term in our house called pop, that whenever anybody got a compliment, they found a way to pop it, which is pass on praise. And so it's like, you know, if my daughter was playing violin and somebody said, wow, you play so beautiful, she would kind of cultivated a habit of just saying, I've had really good teachers. Thank you, I've had really good. So that it's doesn't always stay about her and what she's done, because none of us live in a vacuum. Everybody's always pouring into everybody else. People are encouraging you. People are helping you further develop. And so if they cultivate a mindset that they're not almighty and powerful, it helps actually when they fail. Because we're going to touch that in just a little bit. But if they understand that not everything is resting on their shoulders, it makes failing easier to push through. Because at some point, no matter how successful your child is, they are going to fail at something, and they're going to have to navigate their way out of it, and you want to have tools in their toolbox to help them navigate through failure. And the last thing I have for this section is to listen when they say, I'm struggling. If they're they have a class with somebody, a student, or a friend in the neighborhood, somebody's bugging them, and I'm having a really hard time with somebody. And when you're busy, because they usually want to tell you this when you're making dinner, and the blower's going, and timers, and things are boiling, and you're trying to chop, and it's just like, I'm having such a hard time, and it comes in as a complaint. And I know it's really hard in that moment to stop what you're doing and listen right then, but just if you can pause long enough to just go, I hear what you're saying, and I want to know all of it. I can't do it right now, but if you could please leave me a note on my bed so that I don't forget that as soon as I'm done doing this, I'm going to come and find you and we're going to talk, right? But if they say they're struggling, or if something's really hard, don't assume that they're lazy and they're trying to get out of it. That you need to dig a little bit sometimes. Yeah, they're just trying to pull one over on you. But as a mom, you know your kids. But sometimes, especially if it's a complaint that comes up more than once, there's usually more behind it. And to dig it out, because it may just be a really simple change that could totally change that whole situation. It may just be, oh, they need more information about somebody else, or it could be a quick call to another parent, or something's happening with like a co-op teacher or somebody, you know what I mean? Like it could be something really small, but it'll make a huge difference for your child, so that they're not continually discouraged. And as women, I know I like to know that my husband's got my back. Our children need to know that we've got their back, right? That we're not going to assume the worst of them and say, oh, you're just making it up, whatever. They need to know that we actually hear them, and if they are overreacting and they're trying to maybe get out of something that's a little bit hard, it's a great opportunity for you to go back and to teach work ethic and to teach perseverance, and there's ways to make that positive. But if a child is continually coming in and saying a very specific kind of struggle, I would definitely investigate and never assume, because there could be consequences later that are really, really painful. I'll just leave it at that. Yes? Pop. Pass on praise. Yes. So just to pop it to other people. It's like, oh yeah, I'm really grateful that my parents paid for lessons, or I've had a great teacher, or whatever. Or, thank you for listening, and even to the person that's given the compliment. So the other E is expect. And this is the big one that I know is hard, especially if a lot of you have younger firstborn children that are still kind of young. Expect them to fail. Not just be ready to walk them through it. They have to fail. They need to fail. I could read a book on ice skating all I want, but until I go out on the ice and fall down on my butt a few times, I'm never going to learn how to do it. It's just like a child walking. They have to fall down. Every new thing that you're trying to teach them, character-wise, school-wise, whether it's math, whether it's a sport, whether it's trying to be kind to their siblings, they have to fail. That's how it's fleshed out. And don't take it personally, like if my child has failed, I am somehow doing something wrong and I need to give up. I am queen of discouragement because my gift is encouraging other people. So discouragement is whatever is your greatest strength, that's your this is a double-edged sword right there. So I get discouraged really quickly, right? And so if they're failing, it's opportunity. It means that they're trying to practice it and they're blowing it, and you have opportunity to set them up again. My daughter is reading a book about Anne, I think it's Broadstreet. She was the first published American poet, female. Anyways, so she's learned about this woman, and one of the things they said, especially it was in the context of faith, but it totally applies to other things. They said that, you know, when you're a new Christian, you kind of have like all these rules as far as things that you should do and don't do, and it's like a child that you wouldn't put them in a long garment when they're learning to walk because they would trip over it. But as they get taller and stronger and walk better, they can wear a longer garment because they have the skills, and that as you kind of walk in faith, it's like your world gets a little bit bigger and you're able to do things that you maybe couldn't early because it's not stumbling you. And I love that picture of like a really long gown that if a baby's crawling and trying to pull themselves up, if it's long, they're always stepping on it and it's stumbling them. So try to not set your child up to fail. As far as if you know they get really tired and are really hungry and you don't want a hangry child on your hands later, don't run them out errands after a long day. If, you know what I mean? It's like don't set them up to fail, but just expect them to fail as a natural course of development, in that it's not a reflection on what you're doing. They need to fail, and it's okay. Because guess what? We get to fail too, because we're still learning as moms and as teachers and as wives and as friends, and we blow it, and they get to practice apologizing and we get to practice apologizing, and it's all good. In the faith aspect, my goal has always been to raise up children that love the Lord, their God, so it's personal, and to love other people. And so when they fail, we're able to model grace and the Lord's kindness that leads to repentance. And I want them to have high standards, but I also need the standards to be reasonable. Here's the clincher though. What's reasonable for one child may not be reasonable for another. Each child is different. Their intelligence level is different. Their maturity is different. And we don't have a lot of standard cookie cutter rules in our house, because I deal with each child as each person. And it's like, well, it's okay for her to do that because that's not a problem for her. That is not okay for you because you would just, you know, turn to the dark side where there's cookies. You need to, that's not okay for you. It's not healthy for you. It's like, you know, that all things are permissible, but not all things are profitable. And so it's to really take each child individually and just kind of go, is this helpful to you? Because if not, you probably shouldn't be doing that. And so make sure that the expectations are reasonable and that they can be met. My son is profoundly dyslexic, whereas my girls probably were, but it was mild enough that they were able to push through. And so I cannot hold my son to the standard of my oldest daughter and expect him to write a screenplay when he's 12, although he wanted to because he kept trying to keep up with his sibling. But I had to explain to him, it's like, okay, you have a different set of tools in your toolbox, and we need you to learn how to use your tools and not try to duplicate what your sister's doing, because they're so competitive in a good way. But I also would encourage you to not have them set up a fake life. If they fail, you don't need to broadcast it to the world, but they can be real with it, with the people that are close to them. It's like, it's okay. It's like, I blow it all the time, and I have people that I am able to go to for accountability or for prayer or, you know, chocolate, and they're able to walk me through it. And so just let them know that failing is okay, and that they don't need to pretend that they never fail and that they always have everything just right all the time. That's a very burdensome yoke to carry. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And that if you have the expectation that at some point they're going to hit a roadblock and fail, and you're realistic about that, your expectations of them are better and you're able to give them grace, but then also it makes you a little bit easier on you, because I know if I do something wrong, then my temptation is to like beat myself up for a long time afterwards. And they know that I fail, I come back, I make it right. They fail, they come back and they make it right. And they know that we're in it together as a family and that we're learning and growing together. So all the pressure is off of you to be perfect all the time too. So yay! Always just think big picture, right? Big picture. So engage is the next section. And that is, the first one is to engage them in the areas of critical thinking. They're receiving a lot of information right now. And, you know, for me, it was trying to reinforce a biblical worldview. So when we were watching TV, reading books, whatever, I would always just kind of keep my ear out. So anything that was something I wanted to reinforce, I was going to say, hey, that's a great example of this principle or of this. And if things weren't, to be able to just go, so what do you think about that? Why did that sit funny with you? And why was that wrong? And how does that not line up? And so that way they can be truth spotters, and they can know that information can be presented really pretty and professionally. It doesn't mean that it's valid or true. And you want them to be able to be really critical about the information that they're getting. Whether it's somebody saying something or something that they read. With that particular thing, it's really a personal responsibility to parents. You can't expect a Sunday school program or a youth leader to do that, because that is daily. They're coming across crazy information, even in things that aren't necessarily pertaining to faith. Like, there's just a lot of weird stuff out there, and it's really easy to find information. I mean, Google's great for some things, but boy, you can find some really strange stuff. And they need to be able to find out, okay, how do I know it's true? And then to run it, I call it running through a sieve, and just kind of running it through a sieve. And it's like, is any of that true? Did it come out the other end? And so that they have a process to go, okay, this needs to line up with this, or I'm going to check it mentally so that that doesn't start to formulate their thinking. Okay, look, one sheet down. We're getting there. Flip the page.